Well, I think we'll get started here. Lauren, Anna, Angie, ready to go? Great. Here we go. Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. This is April 18th, 2025. Our topic today is 2025 Participatory Science Projects. Today's webinar is monitored by myself, Gary Wyatt, an Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension, part of our forestry team in Mankato Regional Office. And then also Lauren Beckus from our regional support staff in Andover. Well, thank you, Lauren, for helping out today. And then we also have Anna Stockstead, our extension educator in forestry at the Cloquet office. Our topic again today is 2025 Participatory Science Projects given by Angela Gupta, our extension educator in forestry out of our Rochester office. And she's been doing this for quite a while, and it's just an excellent project. So our Zoom details today, Q&A, just enter your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And all of our webinars are recorded in our Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. That's a YouTube website there that has all of our recordings of our Fridays with a Forester. Angie, I'm going to stop sharing, and you can maybe start.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. So yeah, everybody, thanks for joining us this morning. I'm going to talk about using participatory science to address critical questions. I'm going to look at a review of 2024 and an update for 2025. So let's get started. First, I wanted to say we're rolling out this program as a little bit a bigger program, a little more comprehensive program. And so I just want to identify how we're thinking about this. So the TIPS program empowers volunteers, landowners, and natural resource professionals to collaboratively address forest health challenges through participatory science, reducing invasive species impacts and fostering resilient ecosystems while bridging research and community action. So that's what our goal is, and you, the community, are absolutely critical component of this. So if you spent any time on our website last year, these were the projects that we directed you towards. And so I will review and give you updates on each of these. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll tell you what we're aspiring to do in 2025. So I just want to say there's like two components of this typically. There's the terrestrial invasive team, and then there's the climate ready woods team, and they're doing most of our the content at this point. And so here is the terrestrial invasive species team, and I'm delighted that our newest educator, Hannah Kim, is a part of that, along with Emily Dombeck, who's been a long time communications coordinator, and myself. So yay, I'm really excited by our addition to the team and the work that we have ramped up. So I'm going to specifically give feedback on these 4 things. The Japanese beetle biocontrol was actually a university faculty-led project, and I have not seen the results of that. So I'm going to give you the results of the other 4. And just real quickly in one slide. So we had 46 new verified reports of jumping worms in EDMAPs in Southeast Minnesota. That does include the metro. If you're unfamiliar with jumping worms, they're a relatively new invasive worm in the state of Minnesota for which we have no scientifically recommended management to eradicate them. And we are very worried about their impact to our forest soils. They really change the soil composition. They live in only about the top 8 inches of soil. And so we really want to, if there are jumping worms on site, we want to get those identified so we can see if they're good spots to do soil erosion participatory science. So to look more closely at the impacts of soil because of jumping worms. So 46 new verified sites, but we will definitely be continuing this project in 2025. And Hannah's work, quite a bit of her time will be on that project. So then we found 382 purple loosestrife reports were added to EDMAPs. Now I want to say this is a purple loosestrife, if you're familiar with that plant, has been around for a long time. It's an invasive plant. It kind of straddles the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. And so you find it near wet edges and near wetlands. And there is a really successful biocontrol agent, Garrulacea beetle. And so part of the impetus of this participatory science initiative last year wasn't just to find purple loosestrife. We know that that is around, but rather to get our records updated. because it is now legal to rear and move around the biocontrol Garrulacea beetles, and there's a couple within that species. But you need to know where they are, and you need to know where purple loosestrife is becoming a large enough population to be problematic, and then you need to figure out how to get the beetles from one place to another. And so this effort was to help do that update reporting and get things where they need to be. If you're not familiar with this issue, these beetles have been around for a long time. They can be freely moved. They do exactly what we want of a biocontrol species in that they're very host specific. They target purple loosestrife. They will significantly decrease the population. And this is part of the challenge, is that they will at times totally kill the population of purple loosestrife. Then they themselves die out on site. And then if purple loosestrife gets reintroduced or there's a few immature plants that survive, there's no biocontrol to bring the population back into check. So that's part of the reason we need to continually monitor and move around. So 328 new reports into EdMaps. That was really 318 reports of new locations. So good. Now we know where to put these beetles. 86 acres of purple loosestrife were reported, and that was in part because of the 65 EdMaps Pro revisits. So people went out 65 different places and said, "We know it was here before. I'm going to go back and see if the infestation is bigger or it's gone. Do we need to do anything?" And so that happened 65 times. And then there were the 34 reports of the beetle itself. And the beetle is quite tiny. So you have to be looking for it and you have to be looking at purple loosestrife. So this is, I think, pretty great work. And it mostly helps us know how to manage this species, right? To update those records to figure out where to go next year. So I'm excited by that. Creeping bellflower was not in my spring programs last year. We ended up adding it because there was a lot of chatter about about creeping bellflower. That is a garden plant that is showing signs of escaping into our natural areas, and to be invasive, something has to be non-native and cause economic, ecological, or human health harm, but it can take a while to establish whether a plant is causing harm. And so many of our TIPS projects try to sort that out, that we want to better understand where the distribution and density is there evidence of harm, so that we can then potentially um, work on policies that could prevent further introductions. And so this was added, 438 new reports in creeping bellflower in iNaturalist, and a pretty quick review of them, I would say many of them appeared to be in naturalized areas. So that is not great news. Commonly adjacent to gardens. So I don't want to say it's popping up in the boundary waters. Please don't take that away from this. But it does. I need to look a little bit more closely at the 438 individual reports to try to assess that, um, because it is planted in gardens, so we don't want to conflate what is intentionally cared for and loved with what has escaped and is potentially causing problems. But more reports than maybe we wanted to see. So we're going to keep our eye on that. And then there were 37 new reports of calorie pear in iNaturalist. And calorie pear is a tree that is quite invasive further south of us. It is it's a well-known invasive further south of us, and it is now on the Minnesota noxious weed list as a specially regulated plant in the phase-out stage. So it will be illegal to sell in Minnesota in 2026. And right now, it's just being phased out of sale. So this project was really to understand how much exposure we might have, how many trees are planted or out there that we maybe need to monitor the adjacent natural areas. And so I think this is fairly good news. There were only 37 new reports of cow repair. I think they were all in community. So think boulevards, yards, things like that. Again, I need to look a little bit more closely, but I don't think we found any in natural areas. So that's good news. But the idea here is that we would keep track of the natural areas near where these calorie pairs are. So for example, there's one right outside my office, right? I'm looking at it right now. And then my office is on the river corridor, and there's a sort of a natural space just across the river. So it would make good sense to sort of monitor that natural space to look for escape calorie pair. It absolutely moves via birds. Every time we have a big storm on the horizon, the birds really cluster to that tree. They eat those little tiny pear fruits, and then presumably they fly away and poop out the seeds. So I did notice that there were some hand raised. Any questions about any of this before I move on? I'm looking at Lauren or Gary to direct.
I don't see any.
Okay. All right. So I'll keep going. So then Climate Ready Woods, we ended up again a little late last year, but this is a project. Anna Stockstead did a really great presentation about this earlier in our Fridays with a Forester series. So I'm not going to go into the programming, but we realized that participatory science could help answer some really critical questions during to better understand some of what's happening with the species on those lists. And so I am just delighted by the partnership that developed between Extension Forestry and the universities, University of Minnesota's Urban and Community Forestry Department, lab within the Department of Forest Resources, and Alicia Coleman. And then she has a lab full of students that go to the university that really helped us do a lot of the iNaturalist verifications and a lot of the data crunching for the tree tracker, which I'll talk about in a moment. But she also ended up having a connection with Alana Friedman, who is a senior at Columbia, in Columbia, New Jersey, at Columbia High School. So that was a really interesting relationship. And Alana ended up doing a lot, of, all I think, of the Tree Steward Journal data inter, you know, um, data work, and that was a big lift because that's a narrative project. So I'll talk about that in a bit, but this is a really exciting new development and team. So quick overview of this project is that we heard from our audience that they wanted climate ready information, particularly for small acreage, but we upscaled that. They really wanted to be pollinator friendly. We expanded that to be like all little critters in little Minnesota. So insects, pollinators, small mammals, and birds. And they wanted advice on species. So we created what turned out to be 44 lists across the state, but the ones that we're focused most on for this project were these migration potential species, which I'm working up to. And what does that mean? So this idea is that some of these species that are native to the eastern United States, but not necessarily native to Minnesota, or certainly not native to the ecoregion in which they might do well in our future, um, we don't know a lot about them, right? So they're unfamiliar to us. And so an example is the sycamore on the right. That sycamore is in Rochester. Sycamore is generally not considered native to Minnesota. It's native to Iowa, and clearly that's been there for a long time. So we really wanted to see if we could understand these species better, and so we realized that we could help have ask participatory scientists to help us understand that better. We also leaned into this idea of rewilding. This is a really long definition, but rewilding, the idea is increasing biodiversity and restoring natural processes. Rewilding aspires to reduce human impact on the environment. Rewilding is open to novel and emerging ecosystems, which encompass new interactions. And so the shorthand for this is rewilding is creating resilient, self-sustaining ecosystems of the future. So that's great. Self-sustaining ecosystems need to be able to regenerate, but what is our tolerance between invasive species? So what is too much regeneration? What is, enough to be useful and helpful? So we're trying to sort of understand these things with the participatory science work. And then finally, I was really insistent that we include the understory list. So each of the 11 ecoregions has a list of native understory plants that we are familiar with these, but much of that was inspired by this statistics. 85.5% of the 83 invasive trees, shrubs, and vines in the Midwest are associated with horticulture. So what that really means is what we buy, what we plant, and what we tend matter. So let's buy, plant, and tend things that are going to do good for us and the ecosystem. And so let us also not plant non-native trees that are likely to become invasive, or shrubs, or herbaceous plants, right? So we can do prevention by planting things that are likely to that are native or near native, and thus unlikely to become invasive. However, and you're going to see this theme come up a little bit later, um, we made the decision to include all the trees and plants that were on our list that made it, um, whether they were in trade or not. And as became fairly apparent, I would say what's in trade really matters. And so one of the aspirations of this project is that by having these lists out there, that consumers might ask for species that they're unable to find on these lists, and then thus the supply chain might become more diverse and have more of these species so that you could actually buy and plant them. And so we're going to see the impact of what's in trade in here in a minute. So from an invasive species perspective, the elephant in room, there was a fair bit of anxiety about some of these migration potential species becoming invasive. And the elephant in the room here is black locust. So black locust is on the Minnesota noxious weed list. It was never on our list because it's a regulated species and it's illegal to plant in the state of Minnesota. It is, however, native to the eastern United States. It is very beneficial to wildlife. And I think we could have a robust conversation about whether it should be on the noxious weed list or it's an early successional plant that has signs of aggression, but could also be a value member of the ecosystem. Alas, it is not on our lists, right? So we're not recommending it. And I just think it's important to remember that 40, so non-native plants, I think they're really looking at those from far away from other continents, are 40 times more likely to become invasive. 12% of introduced plants become invasive. So not all non-native plants become invasive, only a small percent, but an important small percent. But of those near natives, it's only 0.3 that become invasive, and they tend to be invasive in local disturbed areas. And so I sometimes wonder if we're conflating invasiveness with the aggression that is common in early successional plants. So food for thought. Um, and I think part of that, why are near natives unlikely to become invasive, is because if there are little critters in the ecosystem that use those plants, they may have some level of natural um, there might be an ecological way to keep them in check, right? So when we talk about little critters using plants, this commonly means they're eating them or they're manipulating them or using them for habitat, right? So plants are the foundation of our ecosystem and lots of things use them, but when they use them, they can also keep them in check. All right, so getting to the actual meat of the participatory science from 2024, we launched fairly quickly last spring, right about this time of year, Tree Steward Journal, Tree Tracker, and then later we had so many iNaturalist reports in Tree Tracker, we ended up adding iNaturalist verifiers as a volunteer activity. So let's dive into that. So for Tree Tracker, the ask was, we had all of these migration potential species. If you found these species in a region in which they are projected to do well, but not currently considered native. So for Rochester, that could be sycamore. For the Arrowhead of Minnesota on the North Shore, an example would be black walnut. Those were both considered both considered migration potential. Black walnut is considered, of course, native to southeast Minnesota, southern Minnesota, not considered native to the Arrowhead. So we asked people to report them. 118 volunteers committed through our website to participate in this project. If you know anything about iNaturalist, you do not need to know about a project to participate. So there were actually 3,700 observations of species of interest in the state in iNaturalist last year. So holy smoke, that's a lot. That's when we realized we needed help getting through those observations. So there were over 1,200 unique observers, people that put in these observations. Again, clearly this number is way larger than this number. So many of these people likely had no idea about our project, but we were able to harvest their data and use it to inform our work. 271 identifiers. So iNaturalist does community identification. So there were 270 people that said, yes, that species is this or it isn't this. But we also realized we needed help. This was, over 3,700 reports. We really wanted to get as many as we possibly could to research grade. So we put an all call out and 3 people stepped up to just verify species for us on iNaturalist. And then Alicia's lab was able to contribute the time of 5 students, University of Minnesota students. And they did a spectacular job and got pretty much every report that had enough data to be research grade verified. In that process, though, we actually learned that there's a part of iNaturalist which was causing us some trouble. And this was interesting. So if you have a species like eastern redbud, which is on several migration potential lists, generally considered not native to Minnesota, and commonly planted in community as an understory, a very small, short-statured tree on boulevards under power lines, and you appropriately click that it is cultivated because it's on a boulevard, then that cultivation click means it will never get to research grade. And so it took us a little while to realize why some of our reports weren't getting to research grade, but that's why. And so then we realized we needed to sort and manipulate the data a little differently because we still cared about those trees, but they weren't showing up in our data set. So we did that. That's fine. We sorted that out. Then I reached out to iNaturalist and said, is there any way that this could get changed? Do we engage in a good conversation? I learned that that is a feature that they're discussing at iNaturalist, and I'm not alone in hoping that that can be sorted out in a different way. So no change in our naturalist that I'm aware of today, but I was excited to be able to sort of participate in that conversation and have a really good example of why thinking about that a little differently, enabling that a little differently could be really beneficial to researchers and to work like this. And then finally, of the 56 species are on our migration potential list when you put all 11 lists across the state together, 56 species. And we had reports of 31 of those species in the Tree Tracker project. Not all 31, as you'll see in a moment, were in the region of greatest interest, but we did have data about 31 of those species. So we're learning. And then I'm gonna jump to Tree Steward Journal, and then I'm gonna have some information about all the species summarized together. So Tree Steward Journal was a very different project. It was still about these migration potential species, but this was trying to learn other things. Like if you have these species on your property or in your forest, and you are stewarding them, what are you doing and what are you observing? So are you needing to put tree tubes on them? Are you observing insect eating them? Are you observing that they're becoming invasive, that they're spreading aggressively into the landscape? So we wanted to just understand what people are doing and how's it going for them. So this was a narrative journal. So I actually sent people a Google document and asked them to type in answers. So we had 32 volunteers express interest, only 10 submitted viable data. That might look like a big attrition rate, but I'll tell you, when people actually realize I want them to like write a journal, that not everyone is keen to do that. And I think there's a lot of good intentions, but it can be hard to sort of find the time and do it. So that doesn't really worry me. We found some pretty amazing data with the 10 submissions, and all of these Climate Ready Woods participatory science projects will continue for the next several years. So we fully expect this to ramp up, and we'll learn additionals from hopefully these 10 submissions year over year, but also get additional people. So I'm about to offer you 4 different examples from that data set, and they are from 4 different volunteers in different areas. So this quote, "It was so absolutely cool to be able to see something grow from a seed into a beautiful tree. I would even enjoy getting them started and giving them a way to encourage people to give it a try. I really do believe that we can make a difference if we try." This was from a yard tree steward in Pine River. And I got to tell you, that last line, "I really do believe that we can make a difference if we try," just makes my heart sing, because this whole Climate Ready Woods project was really tried to infuse the idea that you can make a difference, that there is hope out there, and you have the agency to make change. And so that it feels like we might have achieved that goal with that quote. This picture on the right is just an image of a journal that was submitted, and I love the pictures that come in this journal format. You can see clearly there's a tree tube on this. Great pictures of that eastern redbud at bloom, and then later at leaf out. So these are the kind of things that you can get when you do a narrative sort of data collection process. The data analysis for a narrative, woofda, that can be really tricky. So I'm really grateful we had Alanya this year. 2 other examples. So this quote on the left is, "Even mundane species that are common here but weren't in our woods, like blue beech, ironwood, and hackberry, have been fun to plant and observe. The reward is a combination of intellectual curiosity to learn about new species and pure enjoyment in their beauty." And this is from a woodland tree steward journalist in Newport. And then I love the picture on the right. That is an image taken from one of these journals. And clearly, this individual spent a lot of time thinking about how to protect these pine trees. And it turns out, I think one of our take-home messages from this project is going to be that protecting our trees is mission critical, and that's not really rocket science, but it is a good reminder, because in forestry when we plant trees in woods, we frankly don't necessarily protect them. We tend to put in very small trees. We tend to put a lot of them, and it can be kind of a good luck, right? Um, but it turns out deer in herbivory is really a big issue, and so this stewardship practice may frankly be one of the most important. But that data is not firm. But I just love the different how much thought went into this, how to protect our tree in a forest. So we also did find evidence of rewilding. So I was like super excited by this. So this is an image of the iNaturalist observations for black walnut in the state. And so this is how the DNR, it's pretty close to what the DNR defines as the native range for eastern black walnut. And you can see that clearly the eastern black walnut is being found well outside of its native range. And I don't know if these are planted or in the forest, but eastern black walnut is considered migration potential in the arrowhead. So these two reports were of great interest to us. So this is some evidence that trees are able to survive this far north and where they are physically in the landscape. And this one near Superior National Forest was of great interest. So it is a picture of the walnut, the nut itself, and it's easy to identify, not a lot of confusion about a walnut. Um, but what that means is that there must be a walnut tree somewhere nearby that has been there long enough to get big enough to be sexually able to reproduce and was able to successfully produce nuts. But the other thing that makes this super interesting is clearly that nut was eaten. So some local critter has discovered what black walnut and is now eating it. And so this is really getting to the principles of rewilding. Now, whether that walnut has been able to successfully produce nuts and have seedlings, I do not know. But we're getting close. This also, is where we need to think about what is our tolerance for reproduction. So how much is useful and desirable for a resilient ecosystem, and how much is intolerable and troublesome and potentially invasive? And we looked in our when we went and improved our climate ready wood lists and sort of implemented a rule that if a species was considered invasive anywhere in the eastern United States, that we would not include it on our list. And the only species for which that applied was black locust. So there's no good reason to think that black walnut will ever become invasive. But this was exciting. This was exciting evidence of rewilding. All right. I love iNaturalist. I love this comment. So it was verified to research grade. It is not marked as cultivated, so we're going to assume it's in the woods. But then somebody said, "Do you know for sure whether the source of this tree is wild or could it have been planted?" And it's a really great question. For the purposes of our project, I kind of don't care about the answer, but it is a good question, right? And so I love the fact that you can add that in iNaturalist, and I don't know that it was replied to, but it's fair. There was also another evidence of rewilding. So Extension Forestry was given some money and we chose to use that to purchase some trees last spring. So we picked to purchase the migration potential species trees appropriate for the Twin Cities metro area, and then have those planted at the St. Paul campus where there is a facility to do research on trees. And so Gary Wyatt just spent a lot of time. There's a group of us, but he procured all these great trees, and they arrived in the spring as bare root, and then we didn't quite get them planted in the spring. So they ended up getting stored over the summer and in a variety of different ways, but some of them were put in pots, so put in soil in the spring, and then we actually got them in the ground in the fall. And in the fall, when we got them in the ground, you can see this hand on the right is one of our students. The university students was out there helping us, and she unpotted this post oak tree that was brought into Minnesota as bare root, potted in Minnesota, and discovered that there was mycorrhizal fungi on the roots of the post oak. Post oak is not considered a native oak to Minnesota. It is considered migration potential in the Twin Cities area. And the fact that the mycorrhizal fungi had successfully colonized it was again evidence of rewilding. So super exciting. I promised you an ugly list, so here it is. These are all, plus these, the list of migration potential species, and then the numbers are the number of trees from either Trees to a Journal or from Tree Tracker that we were able to to identify that were planted in the areas that we're interested in and our migration potential. And there are a lot of trees, actually. You can see in those tree steward journals, people reported over 12,000 trees. So holy smokes, a lot is going on out there. Um, and so I want to be really clear, if you are one that it likes to experiment with trees, and Gary Wyatt, I'm looking at you, um, you can tell us about all your tree experiments in a tree steward journal. We are most interested in these species on this list because those are the ones we've identified as migration potential. But I know Gary has a special place in his heart for bald cypress, and I think he has some planted. And we would love to hear about the bald cypress in addition to any of the species that he might have that are here. And I'm not meaning to pick on Gary, but it turns out I also do this to a much smaller degree. And not all of the species I have planted are on this list. Some are, some aren't. But I, as the researcher, will take all the information you tell us and we will keep that and we will try to learn from it. We're just most interested in these. But you can also notice that Eastern white pine, over 800 different trees have been tracked in these two projects, and Eastern redbud, so getting close to 200. Uh, I think it is not by accident that these are easy to purchase. Similarly, white oak, almost 100 trees were identified in these migration potential areas of interest to us. And so I think we're going to end up with a data gap in all of these trees that are not common in trade. And there are a lot. And so for 2025, we're going to focus on those trees and see if if there are any out there, or if this is truly a gap in trade. So this is sort of the early data summary. Again, really great collaboration with the U4 lab, Alicia and her students. And I'm so delighted that we were able to receive Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund money to continue this Climate Ready Woods project in urban areas. So we have at least 3 more years of funding. So super great. So for those that think a lot about participatory science, I just want to say that there are sort of 3 big pillars of participatory science: formulating the question, collecting the data, and interpreting results. 2024, we did all of those with community. So community helped us formulate the questions that really launched the Tree Steward Journal. Lots of data collection between this Tree Steward Journal, iNaturalist, and EdMaps. And then interpretation, iNaturalist volunteers chose to do some great interpretive work for us with the Climate Ready Woods project. So I just want you to know that we do think about this as a really comprehensive program, and I'm delighted we were able to do all of these things in a single year. I am very aware that I can talk fast, and I want us to be not only have resilient community ecosystems, but resilient communities. So at this point, I'm going to ask everyone to stand up and stretch and wiggle. I can't stand or you look at my belly button, so I'll just do that in my seat. And then I recently had my eco anxiety work peer reviewed, and I was informed that extension we choose to call box breathing a type of mental flourishing exercise. So we're going to practice our mental flourishing through this box breathing exercise. So I want you to breathe slowly for a count of 4, and I'll narrate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now I want you to repeat that. Do it once on your own. Okay, so if you're standing, please sit down. And I'll just remind people, if you've been in a presentation with me in the last year, you've probably done this before, but the picture of nature and water is not an accident. This is the Root River here in Rochester last fall. But there's research out of the Mayo Clinic that these pictures of nature and water together are some of the most calming. So even by looking at this picture, you can reduce your heart rate and you can take some calming breaths, and it is good. And the reason that we do this is because eco-anxiety is real and we want to build resilient community. So in order to do that, I think it's important to recognize our feelings, both the good and the bad, sit with those, create rituals to process those feelings. So box breathing is one example, being out in nature, eye natting, these are all great rituals. Empower hope and agency, which we have we strive to do in our project. And then remember, there are many nature-based human health benefits just being outside in nature, whether you're eye natting, whether you're removing invasive plants, or you're planting trees. This is good for your mind and body and soul. And I'm delighted that Extension's new website is up about eco anxiety. So if you have any questions or whatnot, you can go to the website. It's quite robust now, and share it with others that may be impacted by eco anxiety. So now I'm going to transition to projects for 2025. And I am delighted we're getting them ramped up. So a social media campaign will start next week and you'll start to see some emails. All of the information can be found at the TIPS website. So I think that'll be dropped into your chat. And so here are the invasive species, or no, the species of concern that may be showing signs of invasiveness for 2025. And so cow repair, we're going to do that again. I don't actually think we're going to find a lot more cow repair in the landscape, at least my fingers are crossed. But it has become a multi-state effort with some federal grant money. And so Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan will all be looking for cow repair. And we are kind of considered the northern edge of cow repair infestation. So we want to really understand that better from a regional level. And so we're gonna do it again. And then it turns out arboretums have a sentinel program. That means that they consciously look for, and they chat amongst themselves about which plants are escaping it and may be showing signs of invasiveness. And one of the most commonly reported plants to do that are our crabapple and apples. Now that is, I love a good apple. Honeycrisp is the favorite at our house. So please don't misunderstand. Apples are beloved in Minnesota, but I suspect it's mostly crab apples because we don't harvest those and the birds eat them, and I suspect spread them. But we're going to ask people to look for and report any apple species besides our native prairie crab apple. And prairie crab apple does look pretty different that has escaped. So, all the crab apples and the boulevards near your house, all of the apple trees and orchards, we don't want any of those reports, right? Those are all beloved intended. But anything that appears to in a natural area that doesn't look like it belongs there, we would like that reported to iNaturalist. And interestingly, phenologically, cow repair is likely to start blooming next week or the week after. And then the crab and apple trees will be right behind cow repair. And so we're kind of you're going to see social media come out kind of together. They're also pretty easy to confuse. The big difference is cow repair smells horrible. It smells like wet dog poo. And apples and crab apples, they smell lovely, very floral, just really beautiful. And so your nose may be the most important sniffer or attribute of this early spring detection. Lesser celandine is a species that is a sort of getting some attention. It's also a really early spring bloomer. All three of these are likely to bloom in the next 3 weeks to a month, and so we just want reports of that anywhere that it's out. It is sold in trade, but not very commonly in Minnesota. I think there are just a few reports, so we just want to get a better handle on that. And then a little later in the season, you're going to hear from us about feral swine. Take home message, do not shoot them. Please report them. We don't think we have any in the state, but we really want to be on the lookout. They're really devastating large mammal. And then jumping worms. We're going to be continuing all that jumping worm soil science work, and we really need to get reports of jumping worms in forest areas in southeast Minnesota. So if you work or recreate anywhere in southeast Minnesota, starting early to mid July, please put your hand in the soil and look for jumping worms. So you'll hear more from that as that becomes phenologically appropriate in July. All right, so we are also going to continue all three of these Climate Ready Woods projects, so Tree Steward Journal, Tree Tracker, and iNot Verifier. For everyone that has signed up either last year or next year, you have not heard from me this spring. We are still trying to get through that really robust data set. make some improvements to our program, and then you will hear back to us. So particularly for the Tree Steward Journal, we have not forgotten you. We are still, I know Alicia's hoping to get through the end of the spring semester at the university. We'll get all that finalized. We'll make some improvements to our journal, and then we'll really start recruiting. The nice thing about a journal is you can write about what happened in April in, June. It's not a big deal, right? So just make the observations, pay attention to your environment. You can tell us about it later. All right. And as I said before, we're going to prioritize this year the species for which we don't have much information, which is a lot, but I suspect these are also less common. So it'll take a keener eye and more observations to try to fill in these big data gaps. So with that, I want to remind everyone that people trust their friends and neighbors just about as much as they trust me and Hannah and Gary as extension educators. So you have this amazing power to spread the word about this work, to join our My Minnesota newsletter, e-newsletter, and just engage with your community about this issue, because your community trusts you, and that's critical. I want to introduce you to one of our newest volunteers, Arlo, the short-haired German short-haired pointer, and he is using his powerful nose to look for European highbush cranberry. So this is a new experience for me working. I'm not doing the work. He has an owner and trainer that he works with really closely, Jody, and they are working to see if they can find this plant, European highbush cranberry, which is, we have new data from some genetic work at the university that's super tricky to identify. So we're going to see if canines can do it better than humans. All right, with that, I do think I have time for questions. So I am going to stop sharing and let someone feed me questions.
Yeah, so your first question, Angie, great presentation. Thank you very much. And thanks for a shout out for me planting different trees around my landscape. Actually, we might have a field tour of silver pasture tour around my place, my experimental place, maybe this fall. I planted chestnuts in open pasture, which is a silver pasture type of practice. And yeah, maybe we'll have people out when they're burring. But the first question is great to see chickapin oak on there. There's lots of high pH sites around us in southern Minnesota. Thanks,
Yeah,
Sharon.
awesome.
And yeah, next question is, let's see, is that one nut only the evidence of black walnut up there, referring to the Arrowhead area, could not have been transported up there inadvertently by human visitor from the south. I could easily see a squirrel in Minneapolis stashing that nut in the Duluth pack and storing it in somebody's garage. But there you go.
Yeah, no, it is a fair criticism, or it's a fair comment, right? So what we have is the information provided in that iNaturalist post. Now, I will tell you, the person did not mark it as cultivated, and so I strongly suspect that they ran across it. The image, if you look closely, looks like a guy, someone out hiking. There's hiking boots. It looks like there's a break, right? And that is a thing that happens. People iNat when they're, noticing the things around them and it looks of interest. So it is possible, but I think there isn't a real compelling reason in that particular report to think that's what happened. Um, and so, take all these, I mean, it is important to look critically at all of the data, right? So I think I hear that. For what it is worth, as I have given this presentation, I have had quite a number of foresters come up and tell me where they know black walnut has been planted on the Arrowhead. So, and I keep telling them, please iNat it. And there, my understanding was there was an elected official who had a real affinity for black walnut on the North Shore, and so that person was fed some black walnuts that were planted. So, I think it isn't unreasonable that there might be a black walnut around there either, right? So, I think. I think a lot of people have been planting trees and not telling people about it. Gary and I wouldn't know anything about that. So,
That's right. Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
um, and we've had some conversations about, can we get some retired foresters to go back out there where they have seen trees over their career that are interesting and unusual, and get them to write it up for the university silvicultural library, because some of these plantings, I mean, I know I visited some American chestnut plantings that were maybe done on the down low and are 30 or 40 years old. That's super valuable data. 30 or 40 years of data that we might not be tapping into. So, anyway, it is good to be critical of the reports. I do not think it's unreasonable, and I think there's still a lot more to learn.
Yeah, good answer. And another question on jumping worms. Can you post the ID guide in chat if that's possible,
Yeah,
or we can maybe is there a
I'm
web
gonna
link?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Lauren or Gary or
Yeah.
Anna or somebody to go to the University of Minnesota Extension Jumping Worms page. It's quite robust, and I do believe it has a whole section on jumping worms. And so hopefully we can get that in the chat in the
I
short
think
term.
I may have posted the DNR website for jumping worms before, but check your chat. There's a lot of links there that we've been posting. Our team has been posting during Angela's talk here. Awesome that Arlo is joined the team. That was just a comment.
Yep.
Also, construction, excavation machinery spreads a lot of soil around. Yes, no, yeah. A
Yeah.
question mark, basically.
No, it's true. So, what I say about soil, and this relates to jumping worms particularly, but any soil can be an introduction point for many invasive species. So, we used to think of it as spreading seeds. So, garlic mustard was a good example. So, anytime you have materials brought into a spot, a location, whether that's in your yard and garden, and you're bringing in mulch or sod or compost or plants, if it's in a forest or a prairie, maybe you're putting prairie seed down or you're planting in forest, you typically plant bare roots. They're less risky. But anytime that you're putting materials on a property, I think it is best practice to go back a year or two later and just see if anything that you weren't expecting came up, and if is that a problem or not. Um, and jumping worms specifically, prevention is the only solution, right? So if you are a consumer and you're likely to buy plants, I saw a plant sale sign on my bike ride in this morning. You want to be really careful. So bare root are going to have the least risk. But the local Master Gardener Club, they're often splitting plants from their yard. They're selling those. It's their biggest fundraiser of the year. So in that Jumping Worms extension website, there is an actual fact sheet about how to think about plant sales. So how can these garden clubs have responsible plant sales knowing that jumping worm is in the landscape? So there are best practices for that. Um, but if you're a consumer, my recommendation is you ask wherever you're getting this material, whether it's your local yard waste facility that might be giving compost at a very reduced rate to the community, whether it is your local nursery, whether it is the plant sale, whether you're getting wood chips from a contractor, that as a consumer, you ask, what are you doing to prevent the introduction of jumping worms? And you should hear things like, we are looking for them. We are asking our suppliers about them. We are heating our compost to recommended temperatures to reduce pathogens, which is 130 degrees. We're making sure that our wood mulch piles are not, they're not contaminated. Um, if you don't get those answers, or maybe the biggest red flag would be if they don't know what you're talking about, I'll be frank, I strongly recommend you go somewhere else, that you take your consumer dollars and go somewhere that can answer that question more um, better, because you're taking the risk when you purchase that plant of potentially introducing this troublesome species. Um, and and I have jumping worms in my yard. I've done many, many presentations about them. The world will not end if you get jumping worms, but it is a pain, and you will have to change the way in which you approach your yard and garden. So if you can not get them, that's going to just make life a little easier. And so as a consumer, ask that question.
Thanks, Angie. Another question. I would love to hear more about the conservation dogs. Is this going to be a more common tactic? And then why is high bush cranberry the target for this dog's activity?
Yeah, so two great questions. So I will just share. The volunteer reached out and she has done a lot of like cadaver dog work before, and she's a researcher who works with animals, and she's a dedicated dog trainer as a volunteer. And she really wanted to get into something that I think filled her soul a little bit more. And so she reached out, and we looked at a bunch of different projects, and we're really struggling to find a project that felt like a good fit. And then and I it's one of those things, I just didn't put it all together, but I was communicating with the researcher about the high bush cranberries, and the researcher said, "Wow, I really wish we could try conservation dogs." And I was like, that's the solution to the problem, right? So I immediately put these two people in contact, and we started chatting and understanding, and so sure enough, Arlo is being trained on how to sniff out high bush cranberry, European high bush cranberry. Now, why that matters? So the researchers at the U had an Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund to understand what was happening. So we have a Native American high bush cranberry, which has edible fruit and is quite a lovely understory shrub. We also have commonly in trade a European high bush cranberry, or Gilder rose is another name. And it is a common species in trade. It's planted in community and yards and gardens, and in boulevards and parks. And there was pretty compelling evidence that there's about three different species, European and a Chinese, of this what kind of lump as European high bush cranberry. And there was pretty compelling evidence that it was hybridizing with our American cranberry. And that happens. And then we need to decide if that's a problem or not. It was also, there was some evidence that European high bush cranberry was escaping into natural areas and showing signs of invasiveness. But then it turned out it was almost impossible to identify the difference between the cranberries. And it was to the point where we were looking at little tiny glands at the tip of the leaf, and you needed a hand lens to do it. And so part of that research project funded by the Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund was to ask participatory scientists, myself and many others, to go out there into the landscape to collect a bunch of these leaves, to then give them an identification. So I think it's American, European, or I'm not sure, and send it to the lab. And then they did genetic tests. And what they learned is, with the exception of a few professional botanists, almost no one could 100% accurately identify these two species, and that they were hybridizing, frankly, a little more than we might have expected. So we realized that there's a lot of work to understand if they're really becoming invasive, and we're just really deeply struggling to identify them. So you can't answer that question about invasiveness until you can figure out what you have. And so that's when they were like, man, we have a genetic test, so we can send it off and get it tested, but that's expensive and it takes time. There was a dog. And then in comes Arlo. Um, so I'm just not been able to circle back with Jody, his trainer, this spring, to see how their winter training went and if he's been successful in the forest. But we've been learning a lot about how to train him on plants, what part of the plant is the smelliest, what he needs to do in order to find them, and can he differentiate the species. So I don't know if this will become a bigger area of work, but it is super fun, right? To see what can happen, and to engage more people and more species in this work. So great question.
One other comment about the cranberries, American cranberry that I purchased from the SWCDs in my county. Uh, I actually have found many of the cranberries in my grove that have been eaten by birds, I assume, and just like buckthorn spread in my woodlands. So interesting facts of that nature. Thanks, Lauren. And Angie, wonderful job. That's all of our questions right now, I think. Let's thank Angie for a wonderful job today. Thank you very much. And we've got all this recording will be recorded, as all of them, on our Fridays with a Forester at our Z link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And we have a last Fridays with a Forester, April 25th next week, Forestry for Minnesota Birds. And Jamie Strange will be the speaker there for that. And actually, she'll be presenting a publication that's going to be available for people to purchase or go online and look at and download. So that'll be great. As you leave today's webinar, you'll be asked to fill out an evaluation. It's anonymous. Please fill out your comments on today's evaluation and then to webinar, and also maybe future webinars. What kind of webinars you'd like to hear from us next year. And again, if you're not receiving the My Minnesota Woods newsletter, that's a monthly newsletter by our forestry team. That's My Minnesota Woods. There's a Z link there to access that. And also, again, our recordings of Fridays with a Forester are recorded at our Z link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And thanks again, Angie and Lauren, for monitoring and presenting today. And Anna had to leave early, but great presentation again, Angie. And do contact Angie for any of her tips, programs, and so forth if you want to be involved, and she'll get you involved. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.